I'm recording my homily for the 26th Sunday in Ordinary Time. It is the 26th, isn't it? Yeah. 25th, sorry. 25th Sunday in Ordinary Time. And so the gospel today is the parable. It's the parable where Jesus is talking about how... What was Jesus talking about? Oh yeah. So the parable is... the reason I'm a little distracted, I'm right at the corner of our property, and so we have a cemetery here at St. Mary's, right on our property, but there's a lot of traffic, so I'm getting a little distracted. Okay, so the parable that Jesus tells when he was sitting at the corner of the street, talking to the people, is how there's a landowner, right? And so he needs workers, so he goes down to the marketplace, and he looks for workers. So he first goes out early in the morning, and he finds a bunch of people waiting to work, so he brings them, and then he goes back out later, and there's more people waiting to work, and he goes back out later, and he does it all the way up until like 5 o'clock, and they're only going to work until 6. So the last workers he brings in are only going to work 1 hour, right? And so in the parable, you have them eventually getting paid, and the workers who came in and worked all day, who really worked hard, they're only paid the same amount as the people who worked 1 hour. Now the thing is, that's all they agreed to work for, but they're a bit perturbed. They're a bit jealous, if you will, because they worked hard and yet they didn't get more. And so there's elements of justice. You probably can relate to this if you've ever had a job and somebody else was getting paid more and they weren't doing the same quality of work or working as hard as you were. It's very tempting to get jealous of that, right? Okay, so I'm losing the sun. Get back in the sun. One of the things that I've been talking a lot about in my homilies is the need for all of us to be able to share our faith. And I think one of the reasons I keep talking about it is because when I was growing up, I think that was one thing that was just overlooked, or I just didn't notice it, the need for me to share my faith. And that faith actually dies, just like love dies, if we don't share it. It's very nature, it must be shared. And so I think that's one of the reasons I keep talking about the need for us to share our faith. I think it also implies in that is that when faith is shared, there's a certain maturity. When a person is either too afraid to share their faith, or they're insecure, or they're just too self-centered to share their faith, it implies an immaturity. There's something not quite mature about it. And so by sharing one's faith, it's like somebody who wants to be a mentor. They have confidence in their ability to be a good example to others, and so they want to share it. There's that confidence. And I would say in faith the same thing. When somebody wants to share it, there's a confidence in it, and there's also a maturity. And so I want to talk about how that it's implied in our gospel today. So the landowner, who's the archetype for God the Father, is one who wants to share the work, wants to share the responsibilities, to share the work of the vineyard, the work of bringing the gospel out into the world. And I think we want to be part of that, right? And when we think about that, we think, wow, that's awesome. God trusts me. God trusts you enough to give you that kind of responsibility. It's pretty awesome to think about that. And so the landowner keeps going out and looking for more workers. The landowner's never satisfied. He goes out early in the morning, and then he goes out later in the day, and then in the evening. And what he's doing is he just constantly wants to bring more people into the mission. There's always room for more. And again, I just think there's something beautiful about that. Now you notice that the landowner is not out in the field. The landowner's not doing the work in the vineyard. The landowner is inviting others in to do that. And so he's sharing the work. He's sharing he's giving people opportunity to participate in something that's life-giving, a mission. And so God the Father is always looking for more workers. God the Father is always looking for more people to share in the mission of sharing faith, sharing our faith in Christ Jesus, right? And so God the Father is he's never just saying, no, you sinned in your past life, I don't have any use for you. He doesn't do that. He's always, and so what's implied in the people who are waiting later in the day, it's implied that maybe early on in their life, they didn't want to work. They didn't want to be part of the gospel. And so maybe they were sinners. Maybe they were people who did really bad things. But now they do. And so now God wants them to be part of the mission. So you can hear other parables in that. You think of the story of the prodigal son who wasted his life, but the father was there waiting to bring him back in. And implied in that, bringing back into the family, but back into the mission of the family. And so I think that's really beautiful. One of the things that's implied in that maturity is integrity. And the integrity is that all the workers, whether they came early or came late, they all want to work. And they're working in the same vineyard. And so I think that's a positive thing about this parable, is that everybody who wants to have faith in God wants to work. And there has to be at least that level of integrity. As we're going to discover with the workers, not everything's perfect, but they at least have that integrity. They want to work for God, okay? Now, God may need to purify our hearts a little bit, as we'll see, but everybody wants to work for God. Now, I want to share a little bit with you. So, this last week I went to a meeting for 40 Days for Life. So 40 Days for Life is a ministry where people go out twice a year and we spend 40 days praying in front of abortion clinics. And the purpose of that is not, it's not rendering judgment on people, it's not pointing the finger at the sinner, it's a hope. I would believe it's like going out in the vineyard. It's a hope that we can draw people away from the evil of killing, because that's what's happening in abortion, and give them a different path. It's the hope. So we go out there hopeful to bring something, to bring life to the doctors, to the nurses, to the employees of the abortion clinic, to the young women going in. We want to bring hope so that maybe they'll choose something different, that they'll find a different path. And so I'd like to say that we're there out of love and out of faith. Well, at the meeting, they showed a video, and maybe you've seen the video. And there's a video of this man who goes around this public square, so talking about public squares and the landowner going out looking for workers. And he goes out in the public square, and he's talking to people, and he has a video camera, he has a microphone, and he starts asking these people questions. And one of the questions that as he builds the questions, he asks them if they think they're going to heaven. And everybody he asks that question, are you going to heaven? Everybody says yes. And they're kind of cocky about it. It's like, yeah, I'm going to heaven. Yeah, I'm a good guy. I'm a good person. I'm a good girl. I'm going to heaven. And then he asks them the question. He says, so do you think for God the 10 Commandments are important? And they're like, yeah, 10 Commandments are important to God. Because that's something that we all share. We believe in the 10 Commandments. I think, Jews and Christians and Catholics and Muslims even would follow the 10 Commandments. And so he says, okay. He says, well, tell me how you're doing in terms of the 10 Commandments. And so he talks about the first commandment. And so he says, do you honor God? Do you honor God with your life? Do you honor God with all your heart? Or do you have other gods? Are there other things that are more important to you than God? Are you making time for God in your life? Most of them said, I'm really not. I'm not going to church. I'm not practicing any faith. He's like, okay. So then he asks about the second commandment, and most of them say, yeah, I'm not really doing that. I'm not really following the second commandment. And he asks about the third commandment, and they're like, not really doing the third commandment either, and the fourth commandment, and it's like, not really following the 4th commandment and the 5th commandment. And he goes through all 10 commandments, and the majority of these people, now the majority of these people are young people, the majority of them are not following the 10 commandments at all. I mean, like 0. And so then he asks him, he says, now, are you sure you're going to heaven based on your answers about the 10 commandments? And they're like, well, if you put it that way, I guess not. I guess I'm not going to heaven. And then he asks him and he says, now, if you're going to hell, does that concern you? And most of them said, yeah. And you can see their whole comportment, their whole demeanor change. It's like they're thinking about their faith on a much deeper level. And so then he asks them and he says, so do you think you're going to change the way you're living your life? And their demeanor changes even more. And they become more serious. They're like, I think I should. Now the purpose of these videos, it goes even more into the issue of abortion and things like that. But what was neat to see was that when people go deeper in their faith, they become more mature. And you could see that happening with these people, even if it was just for momentarily. You could see them becoming more mature and realizing they need to live lives of integrity. Otherwise, how can they claim to love God or be close to God or go to heaven? So, I thought that was a neat example of that. And the Father, kind of like this guy going out into the marketplace, is always looking for others. And he's not saying, oh, you're not worthy, you're not worthy. No. He keeps going out. And so we need to do the same, right? Okay, I talked about how the workers, we imply in the workers that they all want to work. But let's go a little bit deeper where maybe some of the problems can lie. Why do we want to work? Hopefully it's in integrity. Hopefully it's for God. But sometimes we can even fool ourselves for that. Sometimes we don't have integrity. Oh, darn, the train's coming. All right. So anyways, why do we go to work? I knew it was coming. Just a second. Give it a second here. Okay, so some people, when they do things for the church, they don't always do it for God, believe it or not. And I have to say that's sometimes true myself. But let's say you have an example where somebody's working for the church or somebody's volunteering for the church, and then the pastor comes to that person and says, you know, I don't really need you in that role anymore. So you're not going to be in charge of that ministry anymore. And the person takes it as a personal attack or whatever, and they decide, you know, I'm leaving this parish, I'm leaving the church, I'm not going to go to Mass anymore. And so it goes really bad. Now, you ask yourself, okay, was that person doing it for Jesus? Was that person doing their work for Jesus, or were they doing it for themselves? And based on the response, you realize very quickly that they were doing it for themselves because it was connected so inextricably to pride. Whereas I know so many people who volunteer in the church, and they, you know, the first thing that they do when you're made pastors, they come to you and they say, Father, look, this is what I've been doing, but if you've got a different vision, if you've got different plans, you know, just let me know and I'll pass the baton on to the next person. And they're very humble about it. And so what you know from that those are the people you want in charge because they are very humble and they're doing it for Jesus. It's not about them. And so those are the workers that have gotten it right. Those are the workers, they're not going to be worried if their fellow worker is is getting away with murder or doing whatever, doing something, and they're getting more from it, they're not going to care, because that's not why they're doing it. They're not doing it to get something. You know what I'm saying? Okay. You know, even in the church with employees, with people who are paid staff, you can tell the difference. You can tell the difference between people who are doing it for Jesus and the people who are doing it for money. You can tell by how they treat people. You can tell by just how they do their work. You can tell by just their demeanor and what they desire to do. And so it's beautiful, it's awesome when you have people, they're doing it for Jesus. So, the workers who are doing it for Jesus are never really going to struggle with jealousy towards others. We're getting at the motivations here, right? When I was younger, I was doing everything I was supposed to be doing as a Catholic. I was going to Mass, I was trying to follow the teachings of the church. But there was a time when my heart didn't want to. There was a time when I looked at the immorality of the world and I had a lot of jealousy. It's like, I wish I could live that way. I wish I could be free to live an immoral life. And I remember, I'd go to Mass and I would do all these things, but it was really, I was just going through the motions. It wasn't integral. It wasn't where my heart was. And so I was like the worker who was jealous of others who were getting away with murder. The guy who gets away with putting in 1 hour. I was jealous. I have to tell you something that happened. So I think God wanted to teach me a little lesson with this gospel. So Sunday, the afternoon after I gave this homily, I went to visit some people up in Mount Vernon. And the speed limit between Marysville and Mount Vernon is 70 miles an hour. So of course I'm driving 70 miles an hour, right? No, I'm not. I was driving 81 miles an hour. Now 81 miles an hour was fast enough to get the attention of a state patrol officer. Now, as I share this story with you, I want you to know I love our state patrol. I love our police officers. They're fantastic. I love them to death. So anyways, the state patrol officer pulls me over. Now, that was fine. I deserved it. I was speeding. But I want to give you the context. So the context is I'm driving along and I see in my rearview mirror a group of about 10 of these racing motorcycles, right? These guys who drive pretty fast on the freeway, and they're all in a group and they're coming up really fast. So I move over one lane to the right to let them go because they're coming really fast. Well, they go by me. I am not exaggerating, at least 100 miles an hour. I mean, they just blew by me. Well, we come up over the hill, not 10 seconds later, and they all see the state patrol officer on the side of the freeway. And so they all slam on their brakes and they disperse. They all start changing lanes. So that way, if the state patrol decides to pull him over, he only gets one or two of them, right? Well, I see this all happening and I see the state patrol and I'm like, oh, justice. I'm going to watch these guys get pulled over, right? And sure enough, state patrol pulls out and I'm like, yeah, he's going to get them. Well, they all slammed on their brakes, so they actually went behind me because I didn't slow down. I thought, well, he's going to get the motorcycles. Well, he pulls out, and all of a sudden I see his motorcycles moving out of his way, and he comes and he pulls me over, little priest in a minivan. And I'm thinking, what? How did that happen? These guys were breaking every law in the book. They're driving aggressively, and he pulls me over. So the officer was great. He didn't give me a ticket. He let me off. But I was still mad. I was still mad that they didn't get justice. Never mind the fact that I got away with speeding. I was speeding also. But that doesn't matter. I'm mad because they didn't get justice. All right. That's an example of our gospel. I didn't care about being held accountable. or me doing what was right, me obeying the speed limit, or being grateful for that. No, it was jealousy. It was envy. It was, yeah, anyways. Okay. For us as Catholics living in this culture, when we see things that are really wrong, so I'm going to go through a couple other examples. Many Catholics, they use birth control because they look at our culture, and our culture gives them an easy option, an option to where they can control everything in their marriage, and they don't have to have faith. They don't have to trust God's providence in the fertility or whether they're going to have another child or not have another child. No, they just seize control. And our culture provides that opportunity and that temptation so easily that most Catholics, or many Catholics, decide just to use birth control. And so what they do is they abandon the Father, they abandon the teachings of the Church because it's hard, because faith is hard, because the mission's hard, and they just go the way of the world. And so what they do is that they become jealous, but so jealous that they actually abandon the faith, right? And so there's things like that in our culture that sway us, that pull us away. And it's because our heart was already going that direction. I'm going to give you one last example. I'm sorry, I'm going really long on this. I'm going to give you one last example where I learned a little lesson on this. So I saw a news article just this last week that Lady Gaga, so you've all heard of Lady Gaga probably, a singer, whose music is not entirely known for being Christian or even moral for that sake, but she's Catholic, and she's not afraid for people to know that she's Catholic, right? She's not afraid for people to know that she has a very close priest friend, okay? And so anyways, in this article, she apparently had to cancel a bunch of her concerts just recently because she has some kind of infirmity. There's some illness she has, I don't know what it was, but she had to cancel her concerts. But through the course of the article, she starts talking about how she prays the rosary. In fact, in the article, it said that there was a picture of her praying the rosary. And I didn't see the picture, but I'm reading the article and I'm thinking, Lady Gaga praying the rosary? Really? No. So it's that kind of a reaction. Because you know what I've done is, as I'm a worker in the vineyard, but I'm looking at a fellow worker, Lady Gaga, whom the Father wants to have in the vineyard, and I'm rendering a judgment on her, and I'm demeaning her value based on my judgment or perceptions of her or her past or whatever it may be, when I am completely overlooking the fact that she could become the next St. Paul. I mean, she could be a phenomenal evangelist because she has so much influence in so many people's lives that if she were truly to become a worker in the vineyard for our Heavenly Father with integrity and love for God and Jesus, that she could bring more people to God than I could ever even dream of. And I completely missed that. Hence the reason at the end of our gospel today, Jesus says, and the first will be last and the last will be first. All right, we share the mission, we share the work with joy, and we try to draw others into it. God bless.